Good morning, Anthem. I hope everybody is having a good morning and that you enjoyed your spring break this week, getting out in the sun and getting some exercise in, some fresh air. We hope everybody had a wonderful Easter and spring break. This morning, we're going to get started with our lesson. We are starting a new series for the next 4 weeks, and it's going to be on abundant life. This morning we're going to talk about abundant faith. Our lesson has to do with storms, and we are very familiar with storms. The last 2 years we have had some severe hurricanes that have traumatized our community and our state. The one in 2018, if we remember, that was Hurricane Florence, and we called it Hurricane Flo. It ravished our state like we haven't seen in a long time. That one was a Category 4 hurricane, about 150 miles per hour winds. We had about 35 inches of rain that fell during that time period. And our state lost about $24 billion in damages to our state. And then followed up by the next year in 2019, we survived Hurricane Dorian. And that one was actually a Category 5 hurricane. When it got to us, it was minimized, but it was about 183 miles per hour winds. About $4 billion in damages, and approximately 73 deaths were attributed to that particular storm. So we are no strangers to storms. We've survived and overcome a lot of hardships during those storms. But today we're going to talk about some disciples that were on a boat and a storm came up. And they had to have some faith, and we're going to learn about some abundant faith. The setting is on the Sea of Galilee, and that particular sea was known for many storms that would come about. Jesus invited his disciples to ride with him in the boat to cross the lake. And as soon as they entered that boat, he found a quiet spot. He had been ministering to people, and so he was kind of tuckered out, and he found a quiet spot at the stern of the ship where the wave action was probably a little more moderate. He laid his head on his pillow and fell into a deep sleep. Winds began to funnel on the lake and aligned on the sea, and it stirred up the water very quickly. Trapped in the basin, the winds began to become deadly. This made the disciples very frightened, very unsettled, just like we've probably experienced when we heard the winds and the rain beating against our house during the hurricanes that we've experienced. The disciples knew the potential for these type of storms, and so they began to get a little worried. Without the benefit of a satellite, though, and weather forecasting, they could not predict how intense this particular storm was going to be like we can. Waves began crashing on that boat, and the wind began tossing them around violently, that they couldn't even hold on for dear life. They were just sloshing around on the deck of the boat. The good news was that Jesus was on board that day. The bad news was that he was asleep, and he was sound asleep. The disciples fought their way to the place where Jesus was sleeping, and they began to shake him violently and say, "You've got to get up. We are in the midst of a really bad storm." Jesus may have been soaking wet. We don't know that. but he wasn't drowning in fear like the disciples were. His response to the panicked disciples was firmly, "Why are you afraid? You have so little faith." And that was found in Matthew chapter 8, verse 26. Jesus stood up and began to rebuke the roaring winds and the raging waves. Where there had been a great storm, all of a sudden there was now a great calm. The disciples discovered that the ministry of their master was way greater than they ever even knew. What manner of man is this who controls the power of nature? Even the winds and the sea obey him. And that's found in Matthew chapter 8, verse 27. Jesus revealed himself to his faithless followers or disciples as God of the storm. The disciples feared, and Jesus showed them there was nothing to fear. When we consider ourselves and our modern life, we sometimes go through storms and we begin to wonder, where is Jesus? Doesn't he care that I'm going through this current situation? Maybe you are like the disciples and you're sailing on a stormy situation. Jesus knew the storms would come to them, and he knows that the storms are going to come even in our lives. He knew the disciples would panic just like he knows we will panic from time to time. And even in our crisis right now with the pandemic, Jesus knew it was coming before it ever arrived in the United States. And he knew that we as human beings would panic. But you have to remember, he's the God who is in control. Storms are opportunities for miracles. Jesus chose to strengthen the disciples' faith rather than reduce their stress that evening. He wanted to show them he is the God who is in control. Faith is sometimes tested when life is out of control, when you cannot control your situation, your circumstances, your location. This is a time when faith steps in. Where is God when you need him? Is he asleep? Is he absent? Sometimes we begin to wonder. Faith trusts that God is in control even in the midst of the storm. Even when you're going through your situation, even though you may be shipwrecked, you've got to believe that God is still in control. Jesus expects more from those who know him. Can you trust God in your storm? Jesus knew that in the future his disciples would face very fiery trials and storms of persecution. He would not be there in the flesh, but they needed to learn to trust him in the storm. And Jesus is asking the same thing from you and I today. Can we trust him even when we can't see him? Even when we can't feel him? Even when we can't be together in the same building? Can you trust him? Or is your faith lacking today? Jesus is always in the boat with you. Sometimes it feels like you're all alone, but I promise you, he's right there. Sometimes he is silent, but he's still there. Your storm may come in a variety of forms. But the truth of God's power and ability to calm your storm, regardless of the situation or the location, is evident that he is real. Our God is real. He is powerful. And there's nothing that's impossible for him. When we're placing our faith in God during times of trouble brings us to a new level of understanding his power, when you are in a tight spot, I promise you, you begin to see him in a different light. When the storm came, it was called a great tempest of a wind. After Jesus rebuked the storm, the Bible says there was a great calm. Again, Matthew 8:26. The fears you face can be real and they can be imagined. You may have rational fears, such as the disciples feared drowning that day while in the storm on the Sea of Galilee. You may have irrational fears, such as the fear of God does not care and he's asleep on the job. Both rational and irrational can have the same paralyzing effect. Fear can paralyze us. Whether real or imagined, when you believe you're drowning in the sea or drowning in despair, the feeling is exactly the same. Sister Risha does not like being on the water because I cannot swim. It is paralyzing sometimes, but there are times you have to just man up and face your fears and have faith. Faith over fear. God will never deny the reality of the human experience, but lifts us to a higher level of faith. The fear of being abandoned in the storm, that's real. 12 grown men were helpless against the powerful winds and waves of nature, that the only one who could make a difference that day seemed indifferent to their dilemma in their minds. How many times in our lives have you wondered if God really cares about me? Does he really see what I'm going through? Whether it's a situation at school, whether it's something at home, something at church. Does he really care about me? It is difficult enough to go through a storm, but to feel that God has forsaken you and does not care brings a crushing weight of despair. When you've lost a loved one and there's no answers to why God took them so soon. We've all faced some type of situation where we felt like God did not care. Peter learned that no matter how stormy your life may be, you can cast your care upon the Lord. You may think Jesus is oblivious to your storm, but think again. You can cast your cares on the Lord. He cares for you. Did you get that? I'm telling you, students, God cares for you. He is in the boat with you and he cares for you. So as I wrap up this morning, we will encounter storms in our lives. Life happens. It says it rains on the just and on the unjust. Faith in God during those times will sustain us for the future. Every test, every trial, every situation that you go through is only preparing you for the next thing that you're going to encounter. So trust God now. Trust the unseen hand. Jesus gives us strength as we face the challenges that are set before us. Even though our faith is tested, let us hold to your promises, Lord, and understand that above all, you are in control. Your love and your mercy will sustain us in spite of what we do. Thank you for abundant life you have chosen to bless us with. And when fear and worry begins to challenge our faith, we can be assured, God, you will sustain us. No storm is too big for you. I love each and every one of you. I pray that whatever storm, whatever situation, whatever life throws at you, that you will hold on to abundant faith. Until next time, we love you. God bless.